All right, we are going to get started and hopefully a few more will join us. I'm Mary from the Bee Conservancy, and today we are talking with Van Cleef and our pals. We're excited to tell you more about our organization. We're just going to go over a few hive keeping rules before we dive into our chat. You will be muted after we start the presentation. We'd love to know where you're from. If you're East Coast, West Coast, drop that in the chat now. And we do have a Q&A feature, and that will be available throughout the presentation. So if you have a question, drop it in there and we will do our best to answer it after our talk. And now I'm going to hand this over to Gail, who kindly is going to introduce us and tell us why you're here. So take it away, Gail.
So this is the second expert speaker webinar as part of our CSR initiative. And why we are working with the Bee Conservancy is, well, because during the last managers meeting, I won the trivia section, and I chose to make the donation to the Bee Conservancy, specifically because of, growing up in California and being outdoors and my love of nature and how important bees are to all of this. And it falls really much in line with our maison. And so part of the reason why we have this expert webinar speaker series is the fact that it's to raise awareness and to open a dialogue on sustainability issues. And so, Chris couldn't be here today, but obviously we encourage anyone who's in attendance to ask questions. And if you have any follow-up questions after this is over, please feel free to send them to myself or Chris, or give us any feedback. And yeah, that's pretty much it. Oh, and just so you know, and for those of you who don't know me, I am the senior manager of the archives here at Van Cleef and Arpels. So I know that I always tend to forget that because I assume that I know everyone, but I see a few names that I'm not familiar with. So I've been with the Maison for 10 years, over 10 years now. So without further ado, I'd like to introduce our speaker, Rebecca, who will give us a little bit more information about the Bee Conservancy and what it is they do.
All right, everybody. Hi, my name is Rebecca Louie, and I'm the executive director here at the Bee Conservancy. We are so grateful for Gail, first of all, and the generosity of the Van Cleef team, because you've done an amazing service to us with your donation to help further our work. But what is this work? Why don't I tell you a little bit about it? So basically, the Bee Conservancy has a multi-pronged mission to protect bees, safeguard the environment, and secure food justice through community-based education, research, habitat creation, and advocacy. We have a whole range of ways that we do this. We have a lot of workshops and events, both IRL and online, such as this. We create all sorts of assets for all ages and all walks of life. So we have things from backyard bee guide, bee-friendly backyard guides, to coloring activities for kids. We have courses and scholarships to actually train the future and current generations of beekeepers, because honeybee health and excellence in beekeeping is really important. It's a very complicated craft with a lot of things one needs to know to make sure not only your bees are safe, but then the local ecology and local species. So we've rolled out some pretty amazing programs in cooperation with Cornell University, which has some amazing beekeeping courses. We give habitats to community groups, food justice programs, and environmental places like parks or conservatories around both the US and Canada to sponsor bee health and habitat. We have 9 sanctuaries in New York City, including 4 out of 5 of the New York City zoos. And here at our sanctuaries, we have both honeybee hives and native bee homes. And they're both educational and to provide pollinator services to the local NYC community. And we also do fun custom programs and collaborations with both community and corporate groups, kind of like this. Lastly, and this is sort of the most exciting and sort of the newest work that we're doing. One, we just today launched our new community science program, A Bee or Not a Bee. Community science is basically an opportunity for regular people to get out there and do some sort of engagement that furthers scientific knowledge or research or data. And so ours is pretty simple. There's an app called iNaturalist, take some pictures, hopefully of bees, or maybe not bees, because as you're about to learn and hopefully will be incredibly wowed by, there are all sorts of species and they're often confused for other things and yada yada. We'll get there. But basically it's a really fun community science program and a really great way you can get involved, you know, taking pictures on your phone on the go. And lastly, we do advocacy. We've partnered really closely with the Natural Resources Defense Council in the last year to advocate for the curbing of neonicotinoids, which are this very gnarly pesticide. They're neurotoxic, they're inefficient, they're like devastating all sorts of populations, not just bees. And the EPA actually recently admitted, like, yeah, maybe our use of neonicotinoids is like impacting a bunch of endangered species, up to 2/3 of them. So for the EPA to go there, it's kind of an interesting time, and hopefully we'll be done with them soon. But that's like a quick overview of our work. But really what we're here to talk about today with you is why bees, and specifically too, like, why are bees important? Who are they? What are they? And what is the relationship to Van Cleef and Arpels? Because we have a very interesting little chit chat about that at the end. So you're about to see a lot of words. I'm going to just give you the high level. Don't let your eyes glaze over. But basically, bees are a keystone species. There's 20,000 species of bees on this planet, and they are responsible for an incredible amount of work. They pollinate 80% of the world's flowering plants. They also pollinate 1 in 3 bites of food that we eat. So as a keystone species, they are literally fundamental to everything that we do on our survival. And so our work really exists because, unfortunately, bees and a lot of things in the environment are in crisis. We're seeing a lot of bee die-off, and that's due to a number of factors, including climate change, lack of habitat, changing of planting patterns. So like, you know, native species co-evolve to eat or to feed off of native plants. And as we're sort of like changing how we landscape and things, that's disappearing. Spreads of disease and parasites, like, it's not cute out there for bees. And stateside in North America, we have 4,000 species. 1 in 4 of them are at risk of extinction. That is not amazing. So we're doing all the work we can to make sure that this precious pollinator is doing okay. For not so fun fact, these are the crops we'd lose without bees. So, you know, there's this more depressing picture where like this guy is standing there and like all that food is gone. But you get it. If you love your almonds, your almond butter, onions are the base of every delicious meal, like blah, 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 gone without bees. So who are these bees? So we're going to talk about honeybees, which everyone knows, but I did mention there's 20,000 species on the planet. And about 7 or 8 of them are honeybees. And that means like the 19,999, blah, 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 are someone else. And so one, they're ground nesters. Literally 70% of the world's bees live underground in this sort of like subterranean soil universe of bee town. And most of them are solitary bees. So unlike a honeybee colony where you think of like tens of thousands of bees living together and hanging out and having different jobs and cooperating, underground bees hang out. They're like, you know, little introvert and maybe like a little tunnel where they lay their eggs by themselves. That's super anthropomorphizing, by the way, I realize, but, you know, just to give you an idea of how they do it. And bumblebees are one exception to that. We all know our little teddy bear friends of the bee world. And they do have a queen. They do have colonies of 50 to a few hundred bees. But some people like think of solitary bees as kind of being a queen in their own right, all of the female bees, because they're laying their own eggs. But they also are the workers. They're getting all the food. They're building the house, blah, blah. And so two, again, not so fun facts, and I promise this isn't all a downer conversation, but, you know, the rusty patch bumblebee was added to the endangered species list in 2017. And the American bumblebee has seen a decline of 90% and has vanished from 8 states. And last fall, there's like the beginning of the conversation of possibly adding the American bumblebee to the endangered species list. Okay, so we've got our underground friends, about 70%. Then we have this idea of cavity nesters, little bees, again, mostly solitary, who live in holes. That could be holes in reeds, old logs, sometimes like even in crevices, like between rocks and stuff. And so what they do, and actually if you've purchased or you've seen like bee hotels with tubes, sort of like this one over here on the left, that's another type of structure, like a man-made structure that's provided for folks to live in, folks being these bees. So common species of them are leafcutter, mason, carpenter bees. It's about 30% of the bees in the world who live this way. And this down here is a little cross section of what their world looks like. So this is a little mason bee home. Mason bees, like human masons, build stuff out of mud and walls and like, you know, crafty building folks. And so you'll see here, this is a bunch of pollen. That's what this yellow stuff, yellowy orange stuff is. There's a lovely little larva who's like, yum, I'm going to pig out for a while. And once I get bigger, I'm going to gestate here and become like, you know, a big bee. Here's a wall that they'll build to separate each larva and like kind of cell for them to live. And, you know, here's an example of what these kinds of houses look like. So, you know, something to consider about these bees, native bees or wild bees in general. You know, I mentioned the relationship of native plants to these species. They don't fly that far because again, they've co-evolved to feed off of the plants that are nearby. But because native species are going away and they're flying around looking for food that's no longer there because we've like weirdly planted a palm tree in the middle of Manhattan or something where there should be like some clover. You know, there's kind of this kind of struggle to find food and to survive. Whereas honeybees can fly up to 5 miles to go get a meal. So they can like, you know, take the train across town and like get their favorite whatever. That's not the case for most of the species on the planet. They're like really only going a few hundred meters. So I've mentioned honeybees a few times and we're going to jump into them because they are the most kind of top of mind for most of us. Basically, you know, honeybees are social, as I mentioned. So unlike solitary bees, they live in a colony. They work together to build, clean, you know, nurse the babies, defend against intruders, and go out and get pollen for protein and get nectar for food. Fun fact, when you hear the phrase worker bee, who does all of those jobs that I mentioned, all those worker bees are female. And so 10% of the hive, I'm sorry, and then that consists of 90% of the hive. 10% of the hive is male, and they're called the drones. Oh, and there's a slide about them. So actually I'll say that, but we'll get into that. So they're 90% female. This whole universe of tens of thousands of bees communicates through pheromones, and pheromones is also how they connect to their queen, of which there is a single one in the entire hive, and to each other. They also have other modes of communication that involve like their bodies and stuff, and like dancing and movement, which we'll talk about. But they're actually not from the United States historically. They came from Europe in the 1600s. And so sometimes you might hear, you know, the difference, like I've used the phrase wild bee, native bee, you know, those are the species that are kind of indigenous to the land that we're on now. And then honeybees are often considered managed bees because literally they're like this workforce that we, in best case scenario, collaborate with and support, but in some cases also treat like, you know, labor, just not in a great way on a more industrial scale. But, you know, that is sort of like terminology used to make the distinction between the two. They're generalist feeders. They'll eat on everything and anything, unlike again, some of the native species that might be one-to-one to a specific type of or group of flowers. And weirdly, they stay awake, or not weirdly, but interestingly, they stay awake all winter. So they're sort of like those empire penguins who cluster together for warmth. I don't know if you've all seen that movie, but they do the same thing at the center of their hive. They hang out, they shiver their muscles to create temperatures of 90 degrees throughout the entire winter. So when I mentioned earlier, like honeybee keeping, it is intense. There's a lot to learn. The goal of a honeybee keeper is to really make sure that your hive is healthy and strong so that when you're hitting periods, whether of winter or dearth, which is when there's like not so much flowers around, your bees have the strength and the food stores, et cetera, to get through, and the population to get through what they need in those periods. So I'm going to super quickly jump through the cast of characters. We've got the queen. This is her on the left-hand side. Her body's sort of longer, and she's often surrounded by her group of attendants who take care of her. She lays up to 1,000 to 2,000 eggs a day for up to 5 years, because again, tens of thousands in this hive, right? So like that's how they come from. Over here on the right-hand side, these little peanutty things are an example of a queen cell. So queens gestate in this kind of special compartment, which is to be differentiated from over here. Like you see these little like larvae inside these regular cells. These are like regular worker bee cells, and they're sort of flat against the thing versus sticking out like these peanuts. The queen, when she's born, the hive will make several queen cells, and the first queen who emerges kills the other ones because it is her hive. You snooze, you lose. One bee to rule them all. And then she takes one flight out of the hive where she meets some dude bees, drones, and collects some genetic material and enough genetic material, again, to lay that 1,000 to 2,000 eggs a day for up to 5 years during the laying season. So that's the queen. Big job, lots of work. And again, the work, I mentioned all the jobs that they do, or I mentioned some of the jobs that they do. Again, the workers are all female. Over here, this is a really cool close-up of these pollen baskets. So when they're going out to collect this protein source that's so vital to bee food. They literally have like little bags or like, hip sacks where they stuff the pollen in and they bring it home. And you'll see here, this picture, this frame actually shows a lot of stuff, but there's so many different kinds of pollen. You could see all the color and all the bees are crawling over it like, yay. They communicate with each other through a dance. So in the dark, they fly back and wiggle their abdomens and go in like a figure 8. And they're like, this is where the good stuff is. And based on their movements in the dark and the vibrations from it, other bees know that they exit the hive and they're like, okay, Sandra was dancing for us. So I'm going to go, like half a mile, 30 degrees east of the sun, and then like drop down 50 meters, and that's where the patch of the good stuff is. So it is kind of bananas that they can communicate that way, and it's pretty amazing. It does take a life of 12 worker bees to make 1 teaspoon of honey. So just remember that when you're like squeezing out your little honey jar and it's like dripping all over, and you're like, like save every precious bit. And yeah, and people ask like, what is honey for? It's just like sticking things in the pantry, right? Like, what can I eat when there's nothing else to eat? The drones, one job, 10% of the hive, genetic material. And I mentioned that the queen goes and finds some fellas, and they just kind of, because of magic science, know where to congregate, and they come from different hives and hang out, and she comes to find them at the DCA, or the drone congregation area. They're often confused with the queen, and you could see in these 2 pictures below, this is the drone on the right, and they're both kind of bigger than a worker, but different obviously in many ways, the abdomen shape, and he's a little furrier because he will get some pollination done when he's out there. An interesting fact, when the fall comes, the worker bees drag all the males out of the hive because they're like, remember when we're called workers and we did all the work and like we built this house and we built all the honey and like yada yada, and now we have to shut it down for winter. You did not help. So great though. Thanks for hanging around in case a queen needed you, but you are out. So they get dragged out for the winter and literally left in the cold. We talked about honey. 12 bees, 1 teaspoon, 2 million flower visits to make 1 pound of honey. Bees have a honey stomach that stores the nectar when they're flying around, and it doesn't have digestive juices in it, but it does have enzymes, and those enzymes are very key to the honey process because it breaks down the nectar into simpler sugars. And bees actually like trade, like people are like, is this bee vomit? It is not bee vomit, but the bees do exchange the nectar really among like 4 or 5 bees And it goes into all of their bellies to break down with further enzyme before it's put into a cell. And in the cells, the bees fan out additional moisture in the nectar, because finished honey is about 80% sugar, 17% water, or 20% water, whereas nectar is the reverse. So that's kind of like a super crash course in bees in general, and hopefully you are starting to fall madly in love with them. And if you're not, that's cool too, you know. But to bring it a little closer to home, you know, we were looking, of course, at your beautiful catalog, and you know, there's such amazing pieces, and there's this huge emphasis on clover. And so, ta-da, bees and clover have a very intimate relationship. So, like, first, like, you know, on the Van Cleef and Arpels side of things, you know, here we have Princess Grace of Monaco wearing, you know, items from the Alhambra collection. And so four-leaf clovers first appeared in the Maison's archives in 1906, and they were part of a collection of lucky things, including benevolent fairies, which I love that phrase, versus like evil ones. But yeah, they're said to bring love, health, fortune, and luck to the owner. And Jacques Arpel, who was like a nephew of the founding couple, he would pick four-leaf clovers in his backyard and like give them to people as good luck charms. Now, what I find interesting about that is that there's actually 300 species of clover around the world, and all shamrocks are clovers, but not all clovers are shamrocks. And only 1 in 10,000 shamrocks has 4 leaves. So I'm kind of imagining him having like a super, you know, magically delicious backyard that was just like booming with 4-leaf clovers, because that is super rare to find them. But what's the relationship between clover and honeybees? Well, clover is a really common honey cover crop, which means it's used to kind of like cover soils in between like growing seasons, or to like prevent weeds and such. And it's, what's magical about it is that it converts nitrogen from the air into a form that's like super beneficial to the plants themselves. And so they're very heavily used for soil fertility. Plus they're a great source of nutrition for livestock. And so what that means is that people are planting it everywhere, and hurrah, bees also love it because it is, you know, very abundant in flowering. It's actually like very hardy, so it'll like grow back super quick. The most important species for clover, I mean, for honey production of clover, are white Dutch. I have no idea how to say this word, alsike, I don't know, but you can see it there, red and crimson clover. And the flavor, you know, it's very common. So this is literally just a shot from Google. Like most honey that you'll see like in a store will be clover. It's super mild and sweet. It's a light colored amber. And it does crystallize quickly, which means that it gets kind of solid. And people ask me about this, like, does that mean the honey has gone bad? And it does not, because honey does not go bad. It just means that the makeup of the sugars in the honey that you have is kind of responding to like temperature, or maybe like a continued slight evaporation of water in it. So the honey is not bad. And so clover specifically does crystallize quickly. And for this reason, it is often creamed. So those are some fun facts about some, you know, clover, which is a big part of your brand. And like, lastly, we like to end on like the good news stuff. So how can you help the bees? Pretty easy. Like if you garden, no chemical pesticides, avoid mulching between plants, because, you know, as I mentioned, a bunch of these folks live underground. So like mulching them is basically putting like a big blanket over the entrance to their house and not letting them come in and out. Ground cover like clover, also to, again, shade and protect those ground nesting bees is fantastic. Planting native species, there's so many beautiful ones, and you can easily kind of like Google your region and find out what's growing there. But yeah, planting native species and planting trees. People think about like flowers as like the tulip, but really there are beautiful trees that flower, and that is like, you know, you're in it to win it, because there's like zillions of blossoms on a tree at any given time during flowering season. Avoid weeding, which disrupts, again, the soil structures and these delicate cavities underground. Test your soil. Who knows what's in there? There could be construction stuff or like weird other pollutions that make it less hospitable to bees. Leave your leaves on the ground in the fall and winter, because that's when like some species are really like, okay, getting in this leaf litter, making like getting all cozy to like snooze a bit over winter and then like emerging later on in the spring. Supply water sources. We're all soups thirsty. And like you can create shallow bee baths, which are like as simple as, like a bottom of a pot, like where when you put a flower pot, like one of those ceramic things, and a couple of rocks so that the bees can land on the rocks and like delicately sip from the water, because they can't really like hang out on the surface of the water, they would drown. And then of course, like support local beekeepers, beekeeping clubs, and organizations. Get to know your beekeeper just the way you'd get to know your local farmer, because actually local honey, it can also really help you with allergies and things, because there's pollens and stuff from your area in that honey. So that's it. That was like the super fast version of things. And now we have a couple minutes for a quick Q&A if there are any questions, but I haven't seen anything yet in the chat or Q&A. Is anybody wondering anything? Right. Then,
Right.
Mary, you want to close us down?
Yeah. Thank you so much, Rebecca, for a lot of information in a short time. And thank you all. We did not meet, but we thank you for taking time out of your day, on your lunch break or whatever it was, to join us and hopefully take away something about bees and clover. And a shout out to Gail again. Thank you for choosing the Bee Conservancy. And you can scan this QR code if you are interested in more bee information or bee conservation. If you're in the New York area, we have almost 10 hives all over New York City. We do a lot of cool programming on Governor's Island, and you can just come and see the hives. And yeah, we are keeping hives in urban environments. So check us out if you like, or take home a fun fact and call it a day. So that's everything from us. Thank you so much.
Thanks, everybody. Thank you, Gail.
Thank you so much.
Thank you, Siri.
All right, we're gonna sign out. Thanks, everybody.